Some of them may have been bailed out by the taxpayer, but Britain's biggest banks aren't letting them stop them giving their employees what's called bumper bonuses. It's a decision in defiance of political and public pressure to curb the payouts amid the severe cuts being made elsewhere all across the economy. RT's Laura Emmett asks London's neediest what they think.
This is austerity Britain. The homeless and needy queue up for food handouts from charities all over London and the UK. But just a few miles away, it's a different world with different rules. Prime Minister David Cameron has shied away from regulating bankers' bonuses. They might have to be a bit more open about them, but pay won't be curbed and there will be no windfall tax.
There was a period of remorse and apology for banks. I think that period needs to be over.
And bankers have taken that to heart. UK banks, including some of those bailed out by taxpayers last year, will be paying out $11 billion to their staff this year. Here on the street, where the needy live literally from hand to mouth, that's going down badly.
Well, I think that's a disgrace. I think they should do something they did in America. And that is, we bail you out, you start paying bonuses. But according to the British law, they can't do that, because they still have their bonuses, so I disagree totally with that. And
he's not the only one complaining. Last year saw thousands of students out on the streets demonstrating against austerity cuts brought about by a global crisis triggered by reckless bankers. Now the Right to Work campaign is calling for a fresh wave of protests against what they're dubbing the government's surrender to the bankers and their huge paychecks.
Well, basically, I think that the amount of bankers' bonuses are obscene, especially when there are people struggling to even pay their rent, to even feed and clothe their children, and when people are getting £3 million bonuses that are quite frankly excessive and just a disgusting amount of money.
Taxpayer lobby groups say they don't care what privately owned banks do, but the ones that have been bailed out with taxpayer money have to show some restraint.
You can't possibly be expected to stomach, at a time when the government's making spending cuts, to stomach these enormous bonus payouts and to watch all this go on when these banks seem to forget that it was the public's money that saved them.
Questions why citizens think or assume that the police are on their side. And there's many discussions about the police brutality, the misconduct, the perjury, the obstructionism, the utter and complete lack of duty to serve and protect, the utter and complete lack of examples of serving and protecting.
Every fucking year, every fucking time, you always fucking shoot someone. Fuck off! Every year you fucking shoot innocent people, and you fucking walk scot-free to fucking law, you fucking murdering bastards!
And then you see that the main focus of the police force, when they aren't brutalizing us physically, they're brutalizing our bank accounts by handing us tickets and citations for God knows every act that we take. Ladies and gentlemen, there is no police force. There is only a revenue generation service. They exist, quite simply, not to maintain order and peace for us,
so much chaos,
for the elite ruling class, so that the elite ruling class can continue to shear the sheep and harvest year after year's worth of annual production of wool.
Rioters were arrested in Brixton.
And then Sutler will be forced to do the only thing he knows how to do. At which point, all V needs to do is keep his word. And then...
famous quote from Maggie Thatcher. Stacey, tell us more.
Yes, she said there is no such thing as society, and the middle classes rejoiced as all of that public housing came onto the market and they were on the property ladder. Today, they are actually very surprised that there is no such thing as society, and they're outraged. And they act as if there's no context to the unrest in the UK. So I want to take you to a headline from 2009 in The Economist magazine. Global tinderbox. 2010 could be a year that sparks unrest.
Yeah, we covered this when it came out, and The Economist magazine blatantly was handicapping social unrest, trying to figure out what countries are most prone to it. And to your point, people are saying, where did this come from? Who could have seen it coming? It was a whole feature story in The Economist. Tell the people, tell the people.
And this is separate from their political unrest index. This is their social unrest index. And if you look at the map, you see that Britain had a medium risk of unrest, social unrest. If the world appears to have escaped relatively unscathed by social unrest in 2009, they wrote, despite suffering the worst recession since the 1930s, it might just prove the lull before the storm. And they cite not only the increasing poverty, but they say poverty alone does not spark unrest. They also cite exaggerated income inequalities, poor governance, and lack of social provision.
Right, so Thatcher, Reagan, they chop the economic supports out from underneath the vast majority of the population. There's a brief sugar high of real estate appreciation, which everyone interprets as their newfound riches, even though it's all based on debt and it all has now been washed out to sea and they're all being broke again, resulting ultimately in the very predictable social unrest in a city like London, as predicted and handicapped and talked about by The Economist magazine, which called it their social cohesion risk. And the results today are being viewed as somehow isolated without context or historical precedent, or somehow nobody knew that they were coming, and that's completely false.
Exactly. And now a lot of people are saying that you can't understand this in any way. It's just sheer mindless evil because there have been no austerity measures implemented yet. And yet, today, Max, I was reading the Financial Times, and Mervyn King, the Bank of England, said that inflation would reach as high as 5% this year. So this is ignorance on a wide scale, that the populations don't understand inflation as an austerity measure.
But as we talk about what happened in the riots, we've got to be honest with ourselves. Children's ideas of right and wrong don't just come from their parents. And we can't honestly say that the greed, selfishness, and irresponsibility that we saw is confined to the looters or even to their parents. It's not the first time, after all, we've seen this kind of me first, take what you can culture. The bankers who took millions while destroying people's savings, greedy, selfish, and immoral. The MPs who fiddled their expenses, greedy, selfish, and immoral. The people who hacked phones to get stories at the expense of poor victims, greedy, selfish, and immoral. People who talk about the sick behaviour of those without power should start talking about the sick behaviour of those with power as well. Let's not pretend that the crisis of values in our society is confined to a minority only at the bottom, when we see the morality of millions of hard-working people under siege from the top as well. Let's talk about what that does to our culture. Too often we have sent a message from the top to the bottom of Britain's society that says anything goes, you are in it for yourself. As long as you can get away with it, who cares? We hear lots of talk now about role models for communities. But what role model has really been provided by the elites in Britain in the last few decades? So no, the values crisis is not confined to a so-called underclass in Britain. Our whole country is held back by irresponsibility wherever it is found. It can only be solved by addressing the issues right across our society, from bonuses to benefits.
A week ago today, a 29-year-old man named Mark Duggan was shot dead by the police in Tottenham. Clearly there are questions that must be answered, and I can assure the House that this is being investigated thoroughly and independently by the IPCC. And we need a criminal justice system that scores a clear and heavy line between right and wrong.
So this is from the Telegraph, and they're demanding harsher sentencing than is being handed down to 11 and 12-year-olds. The photo you see in this article is a 12-year-old who stole basically a $10 bottle of wine. And he's been given a referral order, which means community service and rehabilitation. And this is not enough. They want prison for this 12-year-old for stealing a $10 bottle of wine.
Well, look, David Cameron has to decide whether he's going to allow plundering in the City of London to finance his economic growth. George Osborne has to make this decision. Or whether he's going to outlaw plundering in the City of London and therefore outlaw plundering in the rest of society. You can't have both, David Cameron. You can't allow plundering in the City of London and then outlaw it in the ghetto that you created from the City of London, plundering. So what's the phrase that you see online a lot? STFU. STFU, David Cameron, because you're completely off base here. You are a total product of an elitist school of banking schmucks.
Well, Max, let's look at a quote from David Cameron about these young looters, the 11 and 12-year-olds. He says, quote, "If you're old enough to commit the crime, you are old enough to face the punishment." So I want to wind back to earlier this year from January 2011 in this headline. Cameron warns against banker bashing. So UK Prime Minister David Cameron yesterday said he understood the public anger towards the nation's banks, but warned against banker bashing.
Here it's blatantly obvious that your own bankers are financially raping your people. Right up there, Cameron, you did nothing because you're in their pocket, because you're a schmuck. Why are you going after these people?
Well, that's important for the population. It's up to the population as well. The population, I have to say, is much more outraged by these young thugs in the ghetto than they are by the older thugs in the city.
This is what the Nobel Prize winner in economics, George Akerlof, and his co-author Paul Romer wrote about in 1993. And their title pretty much says it all: Looting the Economic Underworld of Bankruptcy for Profit. And what they said, and I'm quoting them, is that this kind of fraud by the CEOs using accounting is a sure thing. So it's a sure thing that the CEOs will get rich. The way they get rich, unfortunately, is by deliberately making bad loans, which create a lot of phony accounting income. So it's also guaranteed that they will ruin the economy. And then the question is, are the prosecutors going to take them on? And we've had two administrations in a row, the Bush and the Obama administration, that have allowed these criminals to operate with near total impunity.
All right, Bill Black, you mentioned the word looting, and anyone who looks at this situation even for 5 minutes can tell that this is a case of looting. And why is it that Obama does he need to look up the word looting in the dictionary? Or what's his problem?
Well, again, it's not unique to Obama. This is the last two administrations, and indeed under the Clinton administration as well, especially near the end, where they passed Commodities Future Modernization Act to stop all regulation of credit default swaps. These have been three administrations that have adopted policies that in our jargon and criminology are highly criminogenic. That means they will produce epic amounts of fraud. And then you had Attorney General Mukasey under Bush famously refuse to even investigate the major frauds, saying that they were simply the equivalent of, and I'm quoting, white-collar street crime. And then it's revealed in the New York Times that Secretary Geithner intervened to try to prevent even investigations, much less prosecutions, of the largest banks. And so we have this bizarre, incredible concept from Treasury Secretary Geithner, and that is the path to financial stability is to leave the frauds who caused this crisis in control of our largest banks, and then to bail them out, and then to seek political contributions from them.